Everyone at the party pretended she wasn't there. The billionaire's daughter, alone in a glittering ballroom, eyes begging for someone to notice, while her own father laughed with strangers just a few feet away. Not one person looked at her. Not one. And then, across the room, a waitress froze. She saw it. The stillness. The way the girl's hands twitched, desperate to speak a language no one around her understood. The waitress's heart pounded. Should I? Because if she was right, if the rumors about the billionaire's daughter were true, then one small gesture could shatter everything. She tightened her grip on the tray, lifted her hands, and signed a single word. The girl's eyes widened, and in that instant, everything changed. Before we jump in, I want to know, where in the world are you watching from? And what kind of story do you crave next? Drop your answer in the comments below. If stories like this grip your heart and refuse to let go, well, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I've got another powerful story coming your way tomorrow, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. Now, let's get into today's story. The billionaire's daughter sat near the edge of the crowd, back straight, hands folded tightly in her lap. Her dark eyes trailed the groups of children her age who clustered together, giggling behind manicured fingers. Not one of them glanced her way. She shifted, pretending to read a message on her tablet, though the screen was blank. Better to feign distraction than let them see the loneliness rising in her chest. Across the room, near the catering tables, another girl worked quietly beside her mother. She balanced trays of hors d'oeuvres, weaving between guests who never looked down to thank her. She was used to it, used to being overlooked in places like this. Her mother had told her, "Keep your head down, do the job, and you'll be fine." But tonight, she couldn't stop watching the girl in the silver dress who sat so still, so apart from everything. The billionaire himself stood near the stage, shaking hands with politicians and investors. His smile was polished, his words rehearsed, but his eyes rarely drifted toward his daughter. She was here, yet unseen, guarded by bodyguards, but not by love. The black girl's hands twitched against the tray. She recognized the stiffness in the other girl's posture, the way her gaze flickered longingly toward the groups that excluded her. It was the look of someone who knew what it meant to be invisible. A flicker of connection sparked across the crowded room. One pair of eyes searching desperately for acknowledgement, another pair too compassionate to look away. And though they hadn't spoken a word, not aloud, not yet, something told them both that their worlds were about to collide. Have you ever been in a room full of people and still felt invisible? Share your experience in the comments. I'd love to know how you handled it. The moment passed quickly, swept beneath the tide of movement as servers rushed to refill glasses and guests leaned closer into shallow conversations, but it lingered in the air like the faint trace of perfume. The billionaire's daughter shifted in her chair again, pretending to scroll on her tablet, though her fingers trembled as if they wanted to sign words into the empty air. Her throat ached with the familiar ache of wanting to shout, of wanting to demand, "Look at me. See me. Hear me." Instead, she remained still, her body practiced at the art of silence. Her gaze drifted back to the clusters of teenagers dressed in their parents' money. She could read lips well enough to catch fragments of their conversations. Trips to Paris, designer shoes, gossip about who was flirting with whom. Every so often, one of them glanced her way, whispering something sharp behind a manicured hand. Their laughter spilled out, harsh and distorted, though she couldn't hear it. She didn't need to. She felt it in the way their bodies shook with mirth, in the way their eyes deliberately avoided hers. Her pulse thudded faster, cheeks burning. She wanted to disappear into the marble floor beneath her chair. It was always this way, her father showing her off like a piece of rare art, while the world admired him and dismissed her. She was a ghost in a silver dress, doomed to sit in the middle of life, yet never be part of it. Across the room, the black girl balanced her tray and wove through the crowd, her mother's eyes tracking her every move from behind the buffet. She knew the rules here. Do your work quietly, stay invisible, don't interrupt the rich. But her eyes kept flicking back to the girl in the silver dress. There was something in the stiffness of her shoulders, in the way she avoided the room's gaze, that tugged at something deep inside her chest. She had seen that posture before, in her younger brother when the world treated him as less, when kids at school mocked him for not being able to speak the way they did. Her brother had been deaf too, and she had learned to sign before she could read, because it was the only way to tell him she loved him, the only way to remind him he was not alone. Now, years later, she hadn't used that skill much. But as her eyes met the billionaire's daughters again, her hands itched with memory. She shifted the tray higher on her hip, steadying her breath. "Don't," she warned herself. "Don't get involved. You'll just get in trouble." She tried to look away, tried to lose herself in the rhythm of serving, but the tug wouldn't leave. The daughter's tablet slipped in her lap, clattering softly against the chair. Her head snapped down, cheeks flushing as she fumbled to pick it up. A group of teenagers across the room laughed at the sound. Their eyes darted to her, their smirks curling like knives. She bit down on the inside of her cheek, refusing to cry, but her hands trembled as she gripped the tablet close to her chest. That was the moment the black girl couldn't ignore. The pull inside her chest snapped tight. Before she could talk herself out of it, she slipped through the crowd and crouched slightly, so her eyes would meet the girl's at level. The tray wobbled in her hand, but her focus was on the trembling fingers clutching the tablet, the dark eyes that were wide with embarrassment. For a heartbeat, they simply looked at each other. Then, with hands that had waited years for this moment, the black girl shifted the tray to one arm, freed her right hand, and signed a single word. "Hello." The daughter's entire body stilled. Her eyes widened, breath catching in her chest as if the air itself had stopped moving. For a second, she wasn't sure she'd seen it right, wasn't sure her brain hadn't conjured it out of desperation. But then the girl's hand shaped the word again, slow, deliberate. "Hello." Her throat tightened. Her lips parted in shock. And then, almost in disbelief, her own hands rose, trembling slightly as she signed back. "You sign." The black girl's lips curved into the smallest smile. She nodded once, her hand shifting gracefully. "Yes, I sign." Something cracked open inside the daughter, a place she had boarded up long ago, too afraid to hope. Heat flooded her chest, rising behind her eyes. She wanted to say 100 things at once, wanted to sign everything she had been forced to keep silent. Her hands stumbled with the weight of it. "No one ever. You're the first." The girl's eyes softened. She wanted to reach out, to take her hand, but the tray was still balanced awkwardly on her hip. Instead, she signed slowly, clearly. "I see you." It landed like thunder, like the sky splitting open. The daughter's breath hitched audibly, though she didn't realize she'd made a sound. Her body trembled, and tears slipped down her cheeks before she could stop them. She shook her head quickly, embarrassed, wiping them away, but the black girl didn't laugh. She didn't look away. She simply held her gaze, steady and sure, letting the silence between them hold what words couldn't. Behind them, the party churned on, guests sipping champagne, children giggling, the billionaire shaking hands with senators. No one noticed the revolution happening in the corner of the room, two girls carving out a pocket of belonging in a world built to ignore them. The daughter signed again, hesitant but eager. "What your name?" The black girl smiled, her hands forming each letter carefully. "Naomi." The daughter repeated it, her fingers shaky but sure. "Naomi." She pressed a hand to her own chest, eyes glistening. "Isabella." Naomi nodded, the smile on her lips breaking into something brighter. Two names hanging in the air like a secret, like a promise. For the first time all night, Isabella wasn't invisible. She wasn't a ghost in a silver dress. She was a girl with a name, with a voice her hands could speak and someone willing to listen. She felt herself breathe fully, deeply, as if she had been underwater and Naomi had pulled her to the surface. But even as warmth spread through her chest, a shadow lingered at the edge of her vision. Her father, watching from across the room, his polished smile frozen as his eyes narrowed on the sight of his daughter in conversation with someone she was never meant to notice. And in that moment, though Isabella didn't know it yet, the spark that had just been lit would either save her or set her world on fire. If you were in Naomi's place, would you have dared to step forward, even knowing you might get in trouble for it? Comment your thoughts. I want to hear your perspective. The night ended the way so many nights did, guests leaving in a swirl of perfume and polite farewells, chauffeurs pulling sleek black cars to the front steps, photographers snapping flashes for tomorrow's society pages. Isabella sat stiffly in the back seat of her father's car, her hands curled in her lap, her tablet resting dark beside her. Naomi's face lingered in her mind, every movement of her hands etched like light on glass. I see you. The words wouldn't leave her. They pulsed through her like a heartbeat, loud even in her silent world. Her father was silent too, staring out the tinted window, the glow of his phone illuminating his face. His jaw was tight, his posture rigid, the way it always was when something had unsettled him. She could feel it radiating off him, the suspicion, the disapproval. She wanted to ask what he was thinking, but she knew the answer. She had seen that look before, whenever someone dared get too close. Back at the mansion, she retreated to her room as quickly as possible. The grand hallways, lined with expensive art and polished marble, echoed her footsteps, but none of it filled the emptiness. Her room was as beautiful as any palace, yet it was still a cage. She closed the door, pressed her back against it, and finally let her hands move. She signed Naomi's name into the air, over and over, as if saying it might keep the moment real. But doubt crept in. Maybe Naomi had only felt sorry for her. Maybe she had signed, I see you, out of pity, not truth. Isabella's chest tightened, and she shook her head, curling into her bed. It was safer not to hope. Hope had always been dangerous. It left her waiting at windows for friends who never came back, staring at phones for messages that never arrived. Naomi's night ended differently. She and her mother left the ballroom through the back door, lugging trays into the catering van. Her mother scolded her for dawdling. You kept looking at that girl. Don't get distracted. These people don't see us, Naomi. We're help. That's all. Naomi nodded, though inside she was still buzzing. She couldn't forget the way Isabella's eyes had lit up, the way her trembling hands had answered back. It had felt like stepping into a secret world, one Naomi hadn't realized she missed until that moment. Yet fear nipped at her heels. What if she'd overstepped? What if the billionaire noticed and complained? She knew how fragile her mother's job was, how one mistake could mean no paycheck next month. The risk scared her, and she told herself she wouldn't push it further. Still, as she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling of their small apartment, her fingers twitched unconsciously, forming Isabella's name in the dark. Days passed, each one heavy with the weight of that fleeting connection. At school, Naomi caught herself daydreaming, sketching hands in the margins of her notebook. At the mansion, Isabella wandered the garden, staring at the gates, wondering if she would ever see Naomi again. Their lives orbited each other in silence, both pulled toward the memory but resisting its gravity. Isabella's father grew more vigilant. He noticed how distracted she seemed, how she signed more frequently when she thought no one was watching. At dinner one night, he placed his phone down and signed clumsily. What happened? His movements were stiff, awkward. He had never taken the time to learn properly, though tutors had tried to teach him. Isabella froze, fork halfway to her mouth. She wanted to tell him everything, that for the first time in years, she had felt alive. But his eyes weren't soft. They were sharp, calculating. She lowered her hands, shaking her head. Nothing. His frown deepened. Stay away, he signed, the words jerky, almost threatening. They are not your world. Something broke inside her. She nodded quickly, lowering her gaze, pretending to accept his command. But inside, her chest burned with rebellion. He didn't see. He never saw. Naomi faced her own resistance at home. Her mother noticed her distraction, the way she seemed distant. You're not still thinking about that rich man's daughter, are you? Naomi, don't waste your heart where it's not wanted. People like that live in castles, and we live down here. Remember that. Naomi wanted to argue, wanted to say that it wasn't about castles or money. It was about two girls who had finally spoken the same language. But she bit her tongue. Her mother had worked too hard for her to risk anything. So they both withdrew. Isabella spent longer hours locked in her room, scribbling in journals, sketching hands that reached for each other but never touched. Naomi buried herself in schoolwork, forcing herself not to look for her in the crowd. But the memory haunted them both, refusing to fade. One afternoon, Isabella sat by the garden fountain, watching the ripples disturb the water's surface. She lifted her hands and signed Naomi's name slowly, her lips moving with it. For a moment, she imagined Naomi stepping through the gates, answering back. The longing was so sharp it made her chest ache. She slammed her hands down into her lap, furious at herself. Stop dreaming. Dreams don't come true for you. Naomi, walking home from school, passed by the high walls of the Billionaire's estate. She slowed her steps without meaning to, her eyes lifting toward the iron gates. She knew Isabella was somewhere inside, maybe sitting by a window, maybe lonely as she had been at the gala. The urge to slip in, to find her, was strong enough to make her hands twitch. But she shook her head, forcing her feet to keep moving. The resistance was heavy, like two magnets pushed apart by invisible force. Fear of punishment, fear of rejection, fear of stepping where they weren't allowed. Yet beneath the fear, something smoldered quietly waiting. Because once a spark had been lit, it was impossible to forget the fire it promised. Do you think Isabella should listen to her father's warning, or should she follow her heart even if it means breaking his rules? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to know which side you're on. The fire smoldered in silence until fate conspired to force it into flame. It began with a conversation Isabella wasn't supposed to overhear. Her father was in his study, his deep voice low but firm, speaking to the household manager. Isabella lingered by the doorway, unseen. "The board wants me to show more involvement," he said. "They think I should make Isabella more visible. Charity work, public gestures. Hire someone to engage her. She needs a companion, someone appropriate." Isabella's stomach twisted. She didn't want a hired friend, someone paid to sit beside her. Yet part of her ached at the thought of having anyone who would speak her language. She leaned closer, praying to see the name. When the manager replied, Isabella caught one word that made her heart race. The caterer's daughter knows sign. Naomi. Her pulse thundered. She backed away before her father saw her, heart pounding as she stumbled into her room. Could it be true? Would Naomi really come here, into this house of marble and silence? The thought terrified her as much as it thrilled her. Days later, the answer arrived. Naomi walked up the long stone steps beside her mother, both dressed more neatly than usual, shoulders tense beneath the weight of scrutiny. Naomi's eyes darted everywhere, the towering pillars, the manicured gardens, the gilded doors that seemed more suited for museums than homes. She had never been inside a place like this. Her mother whispered warnings as they were led inside, but Naomi's mind was already spinning. She knew why she was here. She had been asked, no told, to act as a companion for the billionaire's daughter. She hadn't wanted to agree, but her mother's pleading eyes and the promise of extra pay had cornered her. When the two girls finally faced each other again, the silence stretched thick between them. Isabella sat rigid on the velvet settee, her hands curled tightly against her knees, as if she were afraid this would be a dream that vanished if she moved. Naomi stood uncertainly, her fingers itching to sign but her throat tightening with doubt. She wasn't sure if Isabella even wanted her here. Maybe she was just another paid shadow. Finally, Isabella lifted her hands, hesitating before forming the word. "Hello." Naomi's lips curved softly. She signed back. "Hello." It should have broken the tension, but instead it sharpened it. Neither knew how to bridge the space between them. Isabella wanted to pour out everything she had bottled up, the loneliness, the joy of that first spark, but pride tugged at her. If Naomi was only here because her father paid her, then opening her heart would be another wound waiting to happen. Naomi, on the other hand, wrestled with her mother's warning. Don't get too close. Do your job. Remember your place. So their first hours together were awkward, full of half-signed words and long silences. They sat in the same room, close enough to touch, yet miles apart. Isabella doodled absent-mindedly in her sketchbook, pretending she didn't care, while Naomi watched the clock, pretending she wasn't desperate to say more. But forced proximity has its own gravity, and slowly, inevitably, the walls began to crack. It happened on the second afternoon, when Isabella dropped her pencil under the couch. Naomi bent to retrieve it, their hands brushing as she passed it back. Isabella's eyes flicked up, startled, and in that flicker Naomi saw the truth. Loneliness so sharp it nearly bled. Naomi swallowed hard and signed carefully. "Do you like to draw?" Isabella blinked, then nodded. She held up the sketchbook shyly, flipping it open to reveal pages of delicate hands signing words, reaching out, never quite touching. Naomi's breath caught. She traced a finger lightly over the page, not on the drawings but just above them, as if afraid to leave a mark. "Beautiful," she signed. For the first time, Isabella's lips curved into a smile, small and cautious but real. She signed quickly, her hands almost stumbling over each other. You mean it? Naomi nodded, firm. Yes, I mean it. The air between them shifted, lighter now, threaded with something fragile but alive. They began to talk, not in long flowing conversations, but in hesitant exchanges that grew steadier with each day. Naomi asked about Isabella's favorite places in the garden. Isabella sighed about the fountain, where she liked to sit. Naomi told her she liked music, and though Isabella couldn't hear it, she asked what it felt like. Naomi pressed her hand to her chest, signing, like your heart dancing. Isabella laughed silently, the sound that escaped her throat raw but joyous. Still, friction remained. Isabella bristled whenever she caught sight of her father watching them, his gaze cold and measuring. She hated that Naomi's presence wasn't freely given but orchestrated by him, another performance for his reputation. Naomi, meanwhile, struggled with the rules laid out by her mother and the staff. Stay professional, don't linger, don't act like a friend. Yet every time Isabella's eyes lit up, Naomi's resolve crumbled a little more. One evening, after a tense dinner where her father ignored her completely, Isabella stormed into the library where Naomi was waiting. Her hands flew angrily. Why are you here? Because of him? Because he told you. Naomi froze, guilt flickering across her face. She wanted to say no, wanted to say she would have chosen this anyway, but the truth was tangled. She signed haltingly. He asked. My mother said yes. But, she paused, pressing a hand to her chest. I wanted to see you again. Isabella's breath caught. She stared at Naomi, searching her face for the lie, for the pity. But Naomi's eyes were steady, soft, unwilling to look away. Slowly, Isabella's shoulders relaxed, the fury draining into something more vulnerable. I don't want to be someone's charity, she signed. Naomi shook her head fiercely. You're not. The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was full, charged, brimming with unspoken truths. It wasn't easy after that. There were still awkward pauses, still moments when Naomi remembered her mother's warnings and pulled back, still times when Isabella's pride kept her from reaching out. But the forced closeness was reshaping them, brick by brick. They were learning each other's rhythms, learning how to sit together in silence without it feeling like loneliness. One afternoon, as the late sun painted the garden in gold, Isabella dared to sign something that had been gnawing at her. When you said, I see you. Why? Naomi looked at her for a long moment, then signed slowly, carefully. Because I do. Not your father's daughter. Not money. Just you. The words landed like a seed, small but alive, taking root deep inside Isabella's chest. She wanted to believe them. She needed to believe them. And though doubts still lingered like shadows at the edge of their growing bond, the truth was clear. Being forced together had given them what silence and fear had denied them, time. Time to speak, time to stumble, time to begin. Do you believe Isabella can truly trust Naomi's intentions, or will her fear of being treated like a charity always stand in the way? Share your take in the comments. I'd love to hear it. Time has a way of peeling back layers, of exposing what lies buried beneath the surface. And for Isabella and Naomi, that time became both a gift and a burden. The longer they spent together, the harder it became to keep their walls intact. What had started as cautious exchanges in the safety of the garden or library began to stretch into deeper conversations, fingers flying in hesitant bursts, secrets slipping out in signs neither had meant to share. It was Naomi who opened the first door, though she didn't plan to. They were sitting in Isabella's room, the late afternoon light spilling across the floor, the sketchbook between them. Isabella had drawn Naomi's hands this time, slender and strong, frozen mid-sign. Naomi stared at the page, her throat tightening. She traced the lines carefully, as if afraid the image might vanish if she touched it too roughly. Isabella noticed the way her expression changed, how the smile faded into something quieter, more fragile. She signed gently. What are you thinking? Naomi hesitated. She almost shook her head, almost lied. But something about the way Isabella's dark eyes searched hers made the truth claw its way out. Her hands moved slowly, deliberately. My brother. He was deaf. I learned to sign because of him. Isabella's breath caught. She sat up straighter, her eyes wide. She signed quickly, almost too quickly. Brother? Where is he? Naomi's lips pressed together before she answered. Her chest ached as her hands spelled the truth. He passed away. A few years ago. The words hung between them, heavy and unyielding. Isabella's hands froze in her lap, unsure how to respond. She wanted to reach out, to close the space, but fear of doing the wrong thing held her still. Naomi looked down, blinking fast, but when she raised her head again, her eyes were steady. He hated being alone. People laughed at him, ignored him. I promised I would always talk to him, always see him. When I saw you, I remembered. Isabella's throat tightened, tears welling unbidden in her eyes. She lifted her hands, fingers trembling as she signed. You kept your promise. You saw me. Naomi smiled faintly, though her eyes glistened. Maybe I needed you as much as you needed me. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of everything they couldn't quite say aloud, everything that hummed beneath the surface of their bond. For Isabella, the revelation shifted something deep inside her. Naomi wasn't here out of pity. She wasn't a hired shadow forced into her world. She was a girl with her own scars, her own ghosts, and somehow those ghosts had led her here. But backstory, once unearthed, can cut as much as it heals. The more Isabella revealed, the more she feared Naomi might walk away once she saw the full weight of her loneliness. One evening, curled on the window seat overlooking the city lights, Isabella found herself signing words she had never dared share. When I was little, my mother left. She didn't want a deaf child. My father says she was sick, but I know. She didn't want me. Naomi's chest tightened as she watched Isabella's hands falter, the confession spilling out jagged and raw. Isabella's face was blank, but her eyes burned, and Naomi realized this was not a wound healed long ago, but one still bleeding. Naomi set her hands carefully in Isabella's line of sight. She was wrong. You are not something to leave. You are not something to hide. Isabella's lip quivered, her fingers hovering as if unsure whether to continue. She finally signed, small and hesitant. Then why does he act like I am invisible too? Naomi's heart broke at the sight of her. She didn't know how to answer, not in a way that could erase the years of silence and neglect. Instead, she moved closer, close enough for their shoulders to touch, and signed softly. I don't see you as invisible. I see you. The phrase echoed, the same words Naomi had signed that first night at the gala, but this time they carried more weight, rooted not in impulse but in truth. Isabella stared at her, tears sliding silently down her cheeks, then leaned against Naomi's shoulder. For a while, neither moved. The days after that shifted again. They weren't just companions now, they were confessors, sharing the hidden parts of themselves. Isabella showed Naomi old journals filled with scribbled words she couldn't say aloud, drawings of herself as a shadow among crowds. Naomi shared stories of her brother, how he used to laugh silently when she messed up a sign, how he hated thunderstorms because he couldn't hear them coming. But even as their bond deepened, the shadows of their realities pressed closer. Staff whispered about the growing closeness between the billionaire's daughter and the caterer's girl. Naomi's mother warned her at night, "You're treading dangerous ground. Don't confuse kindness with belonging. We don't belong there, Naomi." Isabella's father grew colder, his eyes sharper each time he saw Naomi beside her daughter. And yet, the pull between them was undeniable. When Isabella signed, "You're the only person who knows me," Naomi wanted to protest, to remind her she wasn't supposed to cross that line. But her heart betrayed her, her hands answering. "And you're the only person who remembers him." It was dangerous, the way their truths braided together, but neither could stop. Backstory had revealed more than wounds. It had revealed why they had found each other at all. Two broken pieces, fitting in ways neither had expected. Still, Naomi couldn't shake the fear. She knew what happened when people in power decided lines had been crossed. She had seen it before, neighbors evicted, jobs lost, friendships torn apart. Every night she lay awake, torn between her mother's voice warning her of consequences and Isabella's voiceless plea not to leave her alone. And Isabella? She was no stranger to abandonment. The fear that Naomi might vanish, like her mother once had, gnawed at her with every passing day. She told herself not to lean too much, not to trust too easily. But her heart, traitorous as ever, already belonged to the only person who had spoken her language without being asked. The backstory was out now, the wounds laid bare, and though it had drawn them closer, it had also sharpened the stakes. Their bond was no longer fragile curiosity. It was need, raw and undeniable. And that kind of need, in a world that despised crossing boundaries, was a dangerous thing to hold. Naomi revealed her brother's death. Isabella revealed her mother's abandonment. Two painful truths binding them together. Do you think sharing wounds makes people stronger, or does it only make them more vulnerable to heartbreak? Share your thoughts in the comments. But sometimes, the most dangerous things are also the most necessary. For Isabella and Naomi, the days that followed became a tapestry woven from small, tender moments. Moments that felt almost stolen, as though the world outside their bubble would snatch them away if it only noticed. Yet it was in those fragile stretches of time that something like healing began to bloom. It started with laughter, an unexpected, delicate sound that neither had anticipated. Isabella had been teaching Naomi some of the more advanced signs she used in her journals, words for feelings and abstractions. Naomi had stumbled over the sign for melancholy, twisting her hand in the wrong direction, making it look more like pickle. Isabella froze, then broke into a silent laugh so radiant it filled the entire room. Naomi, flustered, laughed too, her shoulders shaking as she tried to fix the sign. Isabella, tears streaming from her laughter, signed quickly. "So you feel like a pickle?" Naomi fell back against the couch, laughing harder, and for the first time, the heavy shadows of their confessions seemed to lift. That night, when Isabella lay in bed, the memory of that laughter replayed over and over, warming her chest in a way she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just joy, it was safety, the sense that even her silence could be filled with light. Naomi, too, felt it as she walked home under the stars, her mother's warnings echoing in her ears, but unable to smother the warmth bubbling inside her. Their bond deepened with shared rituals. They began taking walks through the sprawling gardens at dusk, when the air was cool and the sky blushed with fading light. Naomi would point out constellations, describing them with her hands as Isabella watched intently, eyes following every movement. Isabella, in turn, would draw quick sketches of what she saw, passing them to Naomi like secret messages. Sometimes they didn't even need words, just a glance, a gesture, a smile, and the silence between them became a language of its own. One afternoon, they found themselves by the fountain. The water sparkled in the sun, casting shimmering reflections onto their faces. Isabella dipped her fingers into the pool, signing, "Sometimes I imagine sound. What water sounds like, what laughter sounds like. I can't hear, but I imagine." Naomi sat beside her, leaning close. She signed carefully, "Want me to show you?" Isabella's eyes widened with curiosity. Naomi gently guided Isabella's hand to her own throat, then began humming softly, a low, steady vibration. Isabella's eyes fluttered shut as she felt the resonance travel through Naomi's body, into her hand, into herself. When Naomi stopped, Isabella pulled her hand back slowly, tears glistening in her eyes. "It feels like life," she signed. Naomi's heart clenched. She wanted to say more, wanted to tell Isabella how beautiful she was in that moment, but fear of saying too much held her tongue. Still, the way she looked at her said enough. The bond wasn't only built on lightness, it was also forged in the ways they protected each other. One evening, Isabella's father entered the library unannounced, his sharp gaze sweeping over Naomi as if she were a trespasser. Isabella stiffened, her sketchbook snapping shut. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice like ice. Naomi shrank under his stare, but Isabella stood, her hands flying with urgent defiance. "She's my friend. We're talking." Her father's eyes narrowed. "She's an employee's daughter, not your equal. Don't confuse the two." The words cut like knives, but Isabella's chin lifted, her hands trembling as she signed fiercely, "She sees me." That makes her more than equal. Naomi's heart raced, fear and pride warring inside her. She expected Isabella's father to lash out, to end everything in that instant. But he only glared, muttered something about appearances, and left. Isabella collapsed back onto the couch, her face pale, her body trembling. Naomi reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. For a long moment, neither moved, but the unspoken vow was clear. They would defend this bond, no matter the cost. From that night forward, something shifted. The fear of being seen together didn't vanish, but it no longer defined them. They began to take more risks, staying up late in Isabella's room with the door half shut, sharing secrets they hadn't dared speak aloud before. Isabella told Naomi about the books she loved, the way she escaped into stories when the world ignored her. Naomi confessed how she sometimes felt like an outsider in her own community, too bookish, too different, never quite belonging anywhere. Isabella signed one night. Maybe that's why we found each other. Because we don't fit anywhere else. Naomi smiled softly, her eyes shining in the dim light. Then maybe we fit together. The words lingered, heavy with unspoken meaning. Neither dared push further, but both felt the truth humming beneath their skin. And then came the moment that sealed their fragile bond. It was a rainy afternoon, the sky dark and heavy, the house echoing with the storm's presence. Isabella hated storms, not because she could hear them, but because she couldn't. She could see the lightning, see others flinch at thunder she couldn't feel, and it made her isolation ache sharper. She sat by the window, hugging her knees, her face pale. Naomi joined her without a word, sliding down to the floor beside her. After a long silence, Naomi reached out, gently guiding Isabella's hand to the windowpane just as thunder rumbled through the sky. The glass vibrated faintly, and Isabella's eyes widened at the sensation. Naomi signed softly, "That's thunder. You can feel it." Isabella pressed both hands to the glass, tears welling in her eyes as another roll of thunder made the window tremble. For the first time, she felt part of the storm, not outside it. She turned to Naomi, her hands shaking as she signed, "You make me feel not alone." Naomi swallowed hard, her chest aching with emotion. She signed back slowly, deliberately, "You're not alone. Not with me." And there, in the flicker of lightning and the trembling of glass, something unspoken passed between them. It wasn't declared as love, not yet. But it was there, pulsing, undeniable. For Isabella, Naomi had become the proof that she wasn't invisible. For Naomi, Isabella had become the echo of a promise she thought she'd lost forever. Together, they weren't just healing, they were becoming whole. The world outside still loomed, full of judgment and danger, but for now, within those rain-splattered walls, it didn't matter. All that mattered was this fragile bond, this quiet refuge they had built from shared pain and growing affection. And though neither dared speak the word aloud, both of them knew the truth. This was no longer companionship. This was the beginning of love. Isabella and Naomi have begun to find joy, safety, and even love in each other despite the weight of their fears. Do you think love born out of shared pain is stronger, or does it risk collapsing under the weight of those wounds? Share your perspective in the comments. But love, especially one born in secrecy, is fragile when exposed to the harsh light of the outside world. The shatter point came quietly, almost deceptively, in the form of a single betrayal that neither of them had seen coming. It was a Sunday evening. Naomi had lingered in the library with Isabella, the air between them soft after an afternoon of laughter and confessions. They had shared sketches and stories until the house lights dimmed. As Naomi gathered her bag, Isabella caught her wrist, her eyes pleading. She signed, "Stay a little longer. Just tonight." Naomi's heart ached to say yes, but her mother's voice rang in her head. "Don't forget who you are. Don't forget where you belong." With a reluctant smile, she signed, "Tomorrow. I promise." The next morning, that fragile promise broke. Isabella's father summoned Naomi and her mother to his study. His expression was icy, his tone clipped. On his desk lay the sketchbook Isabella had cherished most. The one filled with drawings of Naomi's hands, of silent laughter, of moments that belonged only to them. He tapped it with disdain. "This," he said, "is unacceptable. My daughter's fixation on you is unhealthy. You've encouraged it." Naomi froze, panic rising in her chest. She hadn't even known Isabella's sketchbook had been found. Her mother stiffened beside her, bowing her head. "Sir, Naomi didn't." "Enough," he cut her off. His eyes bored into Naomi, cold and unforgiving. "You will end this. Today. I will not have my daughter tied to some employee's child. If you care about your mother's position here, you will stay away." Naomi's lips parted, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She wanted to shout that Isabella wasn't fixated, that she wasn't some project or distraction, that what they shared was real. But her mother's trembling hand on her arm silenced her. The message was clear. Their survival depended on obedience. That afternoon, when Isabella searched for Naomi, the girl was gone. No explanation, no sign, only absence. Hours stretched into days, and Isabella's chest tightened with each one. When Naomi finally returned, her face was pale, her eyes hollow. Isabella rushed to her, hands flying with desperate relief. "Where were you?" "I thought." Naomi stopped her with a shake of her head. She signed slowly, painfully. "We can't do this anymore." The words hit like a blow to Isabella's chest. She froze, her fingers trembling. "What do you mean? You promised. You said I wasn't alone." Naomi's jaw clenched, her hands unsteady as she signed. "I can't. Your father, my mother. I'll lose everything if I stay." The silence that followed was deafening. Isabella stared at her, her heart splintering. She signed furiously, tears streaming down her face. "So I'm nothing? Just a job. You said you saw me." Naomi flinched, her own tears threatening to spill. She wanted to say it wasn't true, that every word she'd signed had come from her heart. But the weight of her father's threat, her mother's livelihood, the entire world pressing down on her shoulders, crushed the truth inside her. All she could manage was a broken, "I'm sorry." Isabella's hands froze, her body rigid with pain. She turned away, slamming the sketchbook shut and clutching it to her chest as though it were the last piece of herself she had left. She didn't look back as she signed, sharp and final. "Go." Naomi left, her feet heavy, her throat tight with unshed sobs. Behind her, Isabella collapsed onto the floor, her silent cries filling the room with a grief too heavy for words. The bond that had once felt unshakable shattered that day. For Isabella, the wound cut deeper than any before. It wasn't just abandonment, it was betrayal from the one person who had promised to stay. The walls she had begun to let crumble were rebuilt brick by brick, stronger and colder than before. She refused to eat with her father, refused to speak with the staff, even shut away her sketchbooks as though to erase the proof of what she'd felt. Her world grew smaller, darker, and lonelier than it had ever been. Naomi, meanwhile, carried her guilt like an anchor. Every time she looked at her mother, she saw the fear that had forced her silence. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Isabella's face breaking apart, the accusation in her hands. "You said you saw me." The words haunted her, echoing louder than any warning or consequence. She tried to focus on school, on chores, on the safety her sacrifice was supposed to secure, but nothing silenced the ache inside her. The separation was unbearable, yet neither reached across the chasm. Pride and fear stood like walls between them. Isabella told herself she would never forgive Naomi for leaving, for pretending she hadn't meant every word. Naomi told herself she had no right to go back, not when she had already broken the one promise that mattered most. And so, both girls drifted in separate orbits, each haunted by the ghost of what they had shared. But the truth about shatter points is that while they break, they also reveal what's unyielding. And beneath the shards of pain, love still pulsed, fragile but alive, waiting for the choice that would either bury it forever or bring it back to light. Naomi's decision to walk away shattered Isabella's trust, even though it was born out of fear and pressure. Do you believe Naomi was right to protect her mother, or should she have fought harder for Isabella? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'm curious where you stand. Naomi couldn't sleep. Every night, she lay awake staring at the cracked ceiling above her bed, the silence pressing down until it felt suffocating. In that silence, Isabella's face appeared again and again, the trembling hands signing, "You said you saw me." Naomi would press her palms over her eyes, trying to block it out, but the guilt was louder than any storm. She told herself she had done the right thing, that she had protected her mother's job, their fragile security. But then she remembered Isabella's tears, the way her body had folded in on itself, and the certainty crumbled. What good was survival if it meant destroying the one thing that had ever felt like belonging? Isabella, too, spent sleepless nights pacing her room. Her father had noticed her withdrawal, but only responded with his usual cold indifference, as though her silence were nothing more than another inconvenience. She pressed her face into her pillow at night, shaking with sobs she didn't let anyone hear. Naomi's absence was more than loneliness, it was abandonment carved deeper by betrayal. She wanted to hate her, to erase every memory. Yet when she opened her sketchbook again after weeks of refusing, her fingers moved instinctively, drawing Naomi's hands, Naomi's smile, Naomi's eyes. She slammed it shut, furious with herself, But the truth was undeniable. She couldn't let go. Both girls lived in this torment, circling the edge of choice. Naomi rehearsed words in her head, imagining going back, begging forgiveness, telling Isabella everything. But fear whispered too. Fear of her father's wrath, fear of her mother's disappointment, fear of being crushed by a world that didn't bend for girls like her. Isabella rehearsed words too, bitter and sharp, promising herself that if Naomi ever dared to return, she would never let her close again. But behind that shield of anger was the ache of hope, a voice whispering, maybe she still cares. Maybe she didn't mean it. The breaking point came on a cold evening when Naomi, exhausted from carrying her guilt, overheard her mother speaking to a neighbor. "She's wasting away, that poor girl," the neighbor whispered. "The billionaire's daughter. Lonely as a ghost. I saw her sitting in the garden with no coat, just staring at the fountain." Naomi froze in the hallway, her heart slamming. She knew exactly what that meant. Isabella was fading, just as her brother once had when the world grew too heavy. That night Naomi lay awake, her chest tight, and realized she couldn't do it anymore. She couldn't let fear dictate her life, not when Isabella was slipping through her fingers. She thought of her brother, of the promise she had made to always see him, and knew that breaking that promise now would mean betraying them both. The next day, Naomi walked to the mansion with her legs trembling, but her resolve steel. She wasn't summoned, wasn't asked. She came because she chose to. She slipped through the familiar hallways, ignoring the startled looks from the staff, until she found Isabella in the library. Isabella sat curled in the window seat, her sketchbook closed on her lap. Her face was pale, her eyes rimmed with red. When Naomi stepped into the room, Isabella's head snapped up, shock flashing across her face before it hardened into cold fury. Her hands flew up. "What are you doing here?" Naomi swallowed, her own hands shaking as she signed back. "I had to come. I can't stay away." Isabella's face twisted, her hands sharp, almost cutting. "You already left. You already proved what I mean to you." "Nothing." Naomi's throat burned. She stepped closer, her heart pounding. "No, not nothing. Everything. You're everything. I was afraid. Afraid of your father, of losing everything my mother has worked for. But the truth is," her hands faltered then steadied, "the truth is I love you. I love you, Isabella." Isabella froze. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, her eyes wide and shimmering. She shook her head, tears spilling. "Don't say that. Don't say it if you don't mean it." Naomi's eyes filled too. She closed the distance between them, dropping her bag to the floor, her hands trembling but sure. "I mean it. I've always meant it. I was a coward before. But I choose you now, no matter what it costs." The silence that followed was so heavy it felt like time itself had stopped. Isabella's hands hovered in the air, uncertain, torn between the urge to believe and the fear of being hurt again. Finally, slowly, she raised her hands, her movements fragile as glass. "You love me." Naomi nodded fiercely, her tears falling unchecked. "Yes, I love you." For a moment Isabella stared at her, her whole body trembling. Then the dam broke. She dropped the sketchbook, rushing into Naomi's arms with a sob that shook her entire frame. Naomi held her tightly, her own tears mingling with Isabella's, her heart thundering with relief and terror and overwhelming love. Neither spoke for long minutes, their bodies saying what words could not. "I choose you. I choose us." When Isabella finally pulled back, her hands trembling, she signed against Naomi's chest. "Don't leave me again." Naomi pressed her forehead to hers, their breaths mingling, and signed back. "Never again. I promise." The choice had been made. It wasn't safe, it wasn't easy, but it was theirs. Both girls knew the road ahead would be full of battles. Her father's fury, the judgment of others, the fragile balance of their worlds. But in that moment, none of it mattered. What mattered was the decision, the leap into truth over fear, love over silence. For Isabella, the choice was to risk trust again, to let herself believe that she was worthy of being loved, not abandoned. For Naomi, the choice was to defy everything, her father's threats, her mother's warnings, the rigid lines drawn by society, and stand by the girl who had become her heart. And though the storm outside their fragile world was already gathering, inside that library, they had found their shelter. Naomi chose love, risking her family's stability and her safety to stand by Isabella. If you were in Naomi's shoes, would you have made the same choice, or would fear have held you back? Share your truth in the comments below. But shelters built in secret can't stay hidden forever. The next morning, the storm broke. Isabella's father discovered them sitting together in the library again, their hands moving quickly in conversation, smiles soft and unguarded. His face hardened the instant he stepped through the doorway. The air shifted, heavy and cold, as though the entire house was holding its breath. Isabella stiffened, her hands pausing mid-sign, her chest tightening with dread. Naomi's body tensed beside her, bracing for the blow they both knew was coming. He spoke with the precision of a blade. "I told you this was over. And yet here you are, disobeying me in my own house." His gaze shifted to Naomi, cutting her down to size. "Do you understand what you've done? You've manipulated her. You've taken advantage of her condition." Isabella's hands flew up before Naomi could speak. "No, she hasn't. She's the only one who sees me, the only one who cares. You don't get to take her away." Her father's jaw tightened, but he didn't look at her. He looked at Naomi, as if Isabella's words were little more than noise. "Leave," he ordered coldly, "before I make sure your family never works in this city again." Naomi's heart hammered, but this time she didn't shrink back. She rose to her feet, her body trembling, but her hands steady as she signed for Isabella to see and spoke aloud so her father could hear. "No, I won't leave her. You can fire my mother, you can threaten me, but you can't erase the truth. She deserves love. She deserves to be seen. And I love her." The silence that followed was electric, the kind of silence that could split the world in two. Isabella's father blinked, taken aback for the first time, as though the audacity of Naomi's defiance had stunned him. Isabella, tears streaming down her face, stood too. She moved beside Naomi, her chin lifted in defiance, her hands fierce. "If she goes, I go. If you push her out, you lose me too." Her father's breath caught, and for a rare moment the mask cracked. Beneath the steel, something flickered, fear, perhaps, or the faint recognition of how much his daughter meant it. His lips pressed together, his eyes dark and searching. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, with a sharp turn, he left the room, the door slamming shut behind him. Naomi exhaled shakily, her knees nearly buckling. Isabella grabbed her hands, squeezing tightly, her tears mingling with a shaky laugh. "You did it. You didn't leave me." Naomi's eyes softened, her hands brushing across Isabella's cheek before signing. "Never again. I promised." The battle wasn't magically over. Her father's acceptance didn't come in a single moment of defiance. There were still arguments, still silences so sharp they felt like knives, still the looming thread of his power pressing against their fragile bond. But something had shifted. Isabella had drawn her line in the sand, and Naomi had stood by her. The fortress of silence her father had built around her could no longer keep her caged. In the weeks that followed, Isabella found herself braver than she'd ever been. She walked through the house with her head higher, her hands moving boldly in sign, even when no one else bothered to look. She sat at the dinner table with her father and signed, slow and deliberate, refusing to let him ignore her presence. Sometimes he still looked away, but sometimes, just sometimes, he met her eyes, watching her hands as if trying to understand. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was a crack in the wall. Naomi, too, discovered a new strength. She no longer avoided Isabella's gaze when staff whispered or when her mother fretted about consequences. Instead, she held her ground. She visited openly, she laughed without apology. She sat beside Isabella as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And slowly, the whispers lost their bite. Some staff began greeting Naomi kindly, recognizing the light she brought into Isabella's life. Even Naomi's mother, though still cautious, softened when she saw the joy in her daughter's eyes. "Maybe this is where you belong," she whispered one night, her hand brushing Naomi's hair. Their bond deepened in ways words could barely capture. They shared late-night talks beneath the stars, where Naomi traced constellations into Isabella's palm. They sketched their dreams side by side, Isabella drawing what she imagined sound looked like, Naomi sketching the vibrations of laughter and thunder. They dared to sign words they hadn't before: hope, forever, love. Each day, the fear that once shadowed them gave way to something brighter, something steady and real. And then came the moment of return, the echo of where it had all begun. Months after the gala where Naomi had first signed, "I see you," Isabella stood again in a glittering hall filled with people who looked past her. But this time, she wasn't alone. Naomi was by her side, her hand brushing Isabella's lightly, their eyes locked. When someone muttered under their breath, ignoring Isabella as they always had, Naomi turned and signed boldly, her movements clear and unapologetic. "She matters. She is here." Isabella's chest swelled, tears pricking her eyes, and she signed back, "I see you too." The circle closed, not as it had begun, with loneliness and silence, but with connection, with the kind of love that turned absence into presence, invisibility into light. Isabella had found her voice, not through sound but through the language of her hands, her heart, and the girl who had refused to stop seeing her. Naomi had kept her promise, not only to her brother, but to herself, to never let someone she loved feel invisible. And together, they had built something no threat, no silence, no fear could erase. It wasn't perfect. The world outside still judged, her father still struggled, life still pressed heavy on their young shoulders. But love, unexpected, defiant, real, was theirs. And that was enough. As they walked out of the gala hand in hand, Isabella tilted her face toward Naomi, her lips curving into a smile, her hands spelling the words slowly, tenderly. "Love at last." Naomi's heart swelled as she answered with a grin and a sign that needed no translation. Always. And in that moment, for the first time, Isabella truly believed it. Isabella and Naomi found love in a world that tried to silence them. Do you believe love can truly rewrite the rules, even when society says it shouldn't? Share your thoughts. I'd love to know what you believe about love's power.
Thank you for watching all the way to the end. If this story moved you, the next one will hit even deeper. It's more gripping, more unexpected, and waiting for you right now. Don't hesitate. Click the video on your screen, and I'll see you in the next story.